Well, I'd like to talk now a little bit about resiliency. That is an important word, important idea here. And that is the ability to rise above stress and adversity. And there are certain characteristics here that help us. You know, the samsaric approach is that I don't want to have the manure. And the Buddhist approach is you've got it, don't let it get you down. Don't let it overwhelm you. So I was thinking about this the other night. We had, I think it was Wednesday night, where we had supper with Ani Soltrum's children. Mm-hmm. And she's kind of protective. You know, they're very wonderful kids. I could have a lot of fun with them being a kid myself. But she's very protective. And we like to be that way with ourselves. We want to protect ourselves from pain and difficult circumstances and so forth. But what works even better than protecting ourselves and trying to control things so that we protect ourselves is to develop resiliency. So when painful situations arise, they don't get the best of us. We can rise above them. We can grow from those. And that's this idea of resiliency. And why I bring this up with children, and I'm not an expert on children, but it would seem to me the way to raise children is to raise them to be resilient. Because you can't follow them around their whole lives, cleaning out all the stuff that they could run into that could cause problems any more than you can with yourself. So you can train yourself to be more resilient and less overwhelmed when difficult circumstances arise. I talked about blaming yourself and blaming others and being a victim and so forth, and that's a big part of it. So here are some characteristics that go along with resiliency. One is the ability to make realistic plans and being capable of taking steps necessary to follow through with them. And I talked about that this morning a little bit. I talked about plans being actually just fantasies, and to have more of an idea of a vision of this is where I want to go, and being open to opportunities that will help you get to where you want to go. The rigid samsaric approaches make your plans and then follow your plans. Don't deviate from your plans. And when that happens, you'll find that usually your plan doesn't work out. And I think they say in war, the first casualty of war is the plan. And, well, I'm not a warrior, but I think in life that probably isn't too far off the mark either. That pretty soon your plan is not going and you're trying to force life to fit your plan. And believe it or not, that can cause stress. Why isn't this working? I've just got to do more of it. Yes, so it's being flexible, flexibility, resilience. The second one is having a positive self-concept and confidence in your strengths and abilities. So this means seeing yourself clearly. seeing what your abilities are and where your weaknesses are. We all have weaknesses. We all do. And but realize that your strengths and your abilities can help you accomplish things. And also, because of where your weaknesses are, realize that it's best to, you might say, stay away from long involved projects that involve skills that you don't have. I saw an interview with Emmylou Harris a while ago. You know who she is? She's a musician. She's done a lot of different styles, country rock, and so forth. And she said what's even more important is knowing what you can sing, is knowing what you can't sing. So you don't have to be perfect, but know what you can do and develop some confidence in doing that. And again, keep referring back to realizing that you have Buddha nature, that you are not a lump of coal, you're a diamond, and that's behind the whole thing. Having loving kindness towards yourself is really important, and I talked about that this morning. This whole idea of resilience, by the way, didn't even come up until I started doing these programs with other people. And then they started talking about resilience, and I said, oh, I've been talking about resilience all along. I just never called it that. But I just want to throw it out to you this way, so give you another way to look at the way these teachings and practices work. So be kind to yourself. Be caring to yourself. You have to have it towards yourself before you can have it towards other people. It just does not work the other way around. You'll burn out. Lots of other things are going to happen if you feel, if I'm just kind enough to everybody else, then I'm all right. And the third one is communication and problem-solving skills. And so if we work with smaller problems, we will develop the ability then to handle bigger problems. Don't expect to solve all your problems at once. And also, because of interdependence, problems will continue to arise. Yep, I was at KTD many years ago, and they had a Coke machine at KTD at this time. I think this was way back about 1990. And, life is continually giving lessons. And I saw Rinpoche put money into the Coke machine, and nothing came out. Yes, being realized still means I don't get no respect. So if you're doing this and expecting that at some point everything's going to go fine, I don't think so. But, when these problems arise, you can learn how to work with these problems. That it's all workable. That instead of giving up or becoming frustrated or whatever, you realize that going back to the plans, there's always a plan B and a plan C and a plan D, and maybe you have to sit down and think for a while about what plan E is going to be. Now, I teach spontaneously here sometimes, and that's where I am right now. And this reminded me of the time I was at home alone, and all of a sudden, it was a skunk. And I'm in the house. And so I followed my nose and opened the basement door, and there was a skunk in the basement.
Not good.
Yeah. I decided this was a time to sit down calmly and think about this. Yeah. What do you do about this? This was before the internet. I could not Google skunk in the basement. And this is actually a good story. If I ever write a book, I think I'll put it in the book. So as I'm thinking, and I'm not coming up with answers here, anyone want to throw out a suggestion you have? How do you get a skunk out of the basement before he sprays? So I'm thinking and thinking and thinking, and all of a sudden I hear a scratching at the door, the basement door.
You want it out?
Yeah. Exactly. He wanted out, I wanted him out, so let's let him get out. So there was the basement door, there was the outside door. So these doors, they have hinge pins. So I took out hinge pins of 2 doors. I also went and locked up my dog. Yeah. And so I made little, they would be called gates if you're a farmer. You know, little temporary fences between the one door and the other door. Then I went down the basement stairs, and he was under the basement stairs, so I stomped on the stairs to get his attention. He looked up at me, and he started following me up the stairs. And so then I went over the door, got behind it. I did not look to watch him. I just ducked behind it, and he walked out. Sometimes the solution is right there in front of you, waiting for you to discover it. So, it's problem solving. That's life. In a way, what life is solving one problem after another after another. At least that's the way my life is. So that's part of resiliency, is the problem-solving skills. And needless to say, mindfulness is really important. If I wouldn't have been a little bit mindful, I could have panicked and tried to do something rash, like catch him on a bag, live trap him, because I had live traps. I don't think any of these other solutions would have been good. And the last thing you want is a skunk spraying in the basement. Yeah. So we learn to work with our mistakes. Since we're not perfect, that we learn that we can work with the mistakes rather than beating ourselves up about being stupid. And I guess tenacity, diligence, joyful exertion is what diligence is. That's one of the paramitas. We learn to keep persevering. I did try to communicate, by the way. I called up a friend of mine that was a trapper. And, but he didn't give me any good solutions to this either. The last part of resiliency is the ability to manage strong impulses and feelings. And guess what? That is where mindfulness and meditation come in. For us learning how to let go of the strong impulses rather than following them. I think I said this morning, it's like being at the bus stop. The bus drives up. You look at where the bus is going before you get on the bus. A lot of times you don't want to be on that bus. It's going to a place where you do not want to go. Like having a skunk spray in your basement. I don't think I could call up Tatiana and say, can you come down to my basement and clean this up for me? That's his house cleaner. I think she would probably say no. Well, now, the next thing that I want to talk about here is about a thought. I've talked about watching our thoughts, being aware of our thoughts, being mindful of our thoughts. And so the question is then, what are our thoughts? I kind of talked a little bit about that this morning, dangled that carrot in front of you. So, there is a painting by the artist René Magritte. Anyone know who he is? He is a surrealistic painter. His most famous painting is a picture of a smoking pipe. It's not smoking, but one that you would use to smoke tobacco. And being a surrealist, it's a very realistic pipe. And underneath it, he was Belgian, and so it was written in French. But the translation is, "This is not a pipe." This is his most famous painting. Worth millions. The reason why he did that is that it is not a pipe, it's a picture of a pipe. Very simple. And the word, this is where I take off from his art. The word pipe is not a pipe either. You cannot smoke the word pipe. And the thought pipe is not a pipe. You cannot smoke it either. So here you have a mind full of thoughts about things, and they're not even real. A thought about something that happened to you is not the same as having it happen to you. I'm sorry. This is why the Buddha said we're all confused. We think that it's the same. And as a result of that, we don't have to be afraid of our thoughts. The thoughts can't hurt you. No matter how hard I think I'd like to hit you, it's not going to hurt you. It's only if I start acting on that. And so any thoughts that you have, as long as you realize that it's just thought, nothing more, nothing less, and you don't respond to it, you can't can't hurt you. Yeah. I'm hoping to get a little discussion going about this. But I'll go on. Yes?
Thoughts that are emotionally tinged, they can be painful.
Well, of course. But remember, it's an illusory thought.
Right.
So that the next point here is, number 2 is, your thoughts can change in an instant. So we can react differently to the same thing, and other people can have a totally different reaction. Anyone here like hot peppers, jalapenos? There we go. If you give me them, I think you're poisoning me. Same thing. I have had Rinpoches at my house where we will give them a bowl of jalapenos, not quite this big, and he ends up licking the bowl for breakfast. Yeah, me? You're poisoning me. Don't even think about it. Same thing, totally different reactions. So now this friend of mine that was the trapper that I was telling you about, here's a story he told me long before I was a monk, when I was just getting involved in this. He also is a gunsmith. We do have some differences of outlook, by the way. And he has a Harley hog. And a beard, you know, the standard. He's Vietnam veteran. And believe it or not, he's got a temper. You probably know this guy. I think he probably resides down here too. So anyway, we were in a bar one night, and he told me this story, that he has this gun shop, and he still has it. This was a story he told me back in the late 80s. And he moved out in the country to get away from things. He had had enough of the war and being a veteran, and he wanted to be in a nice, quiet, peaceful, rural setting. And the town where his gun shop is in, it's a little bigger than my town, which is the one that I live by. I don't own it. I'm not the mayor, but the town that I live by, which is 250, his is probably 500. It's twice as big. But he would ride a bicycle sometimes to work at home in the summertime because it's nice and peaceful and quiet. You don't have traffic like around here. You could ride a long ways and never see a car. So after he's riding home after a long day's work, and in the road in front of him, he sees a bag of trash. And he goes ballistic because of people that don't give a darn about the environment and just drive down the road and throwing trash out the window. You probably got a few people like that around here too. But as he rode up to it, he got a closer look at the bag of trash, and what he saw was that it was a bag of groceries. Bingo! Instantly, he's no longer mad. Now he's happy because he has found free lunch. And not only has he found free lunch, but it's his free lunch. Now he's attached to it. First it's aversion, now it's attachment. So he gets off his bicycle and grabs the bag, gets on his bicycle again, and starts to ride home very happy. But very quickly he realizes that it's too big and heavy for him to ride the bicycle and carry at the same time. Now he's not happy anymore. Now he is got a little paranoia, because if he leaves it, somebody else might find and take his bag of groceries. So this is the story he told me. I'm not embellishing this. He told me he thought about this, and then he decided to hide it in the brush on the side of the road so nobody else would find his groceries. So he gets on his bicycle and rides home very quickly, gets in the car, and of course The whole ride home, he's worried about it being there because he's attached to it. And then when he comes back in the car, he is relieved to find that it is still where he left it in the brush. Now, that bag has done nothing. It just lay there. It did absolutely nothing. Every single thought and emotion that he had was a projection of his own mind. Remember this? Oh, some of you didn't get this. Could you? Yeah. Boy, you are. You got one?
I did.
Yeah. Yeah, you see that? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. This is what you call projecting. He was projecting big time. And as I said, it was just the bag didn't do anything. So that is what we all do. And of course, we blame the bag. Or else we blame ourselves. But usually it's the bag that gets the blame. So our thoughts can change in an instant. And neither one can be correct. It's tinged with attachment, tinged with aversion, tinged with our history, tinged with our habitual patterns. He could have left the bag on the side of the road for the person maybe coming back to look for it when they got home. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He could have taken it to a food bank. You know, he could have done a lot of things. We always have options. And it's our habitual patterns that guide us to which of the responses we take. With mindfulness, we start seeing that this is how our mind operates. And then we start, in the 7 points of mind training, one of the slogans is, in post-meditation, be a child of illusion. Start thinking that maybe these thoughts and emotions that I'm having aren't so solid. Maybe instead of just buying into them right away, let's sit back a minute here and take a closer look. Be a little skeptical of what's happening. Kind of like that skunk in the basement. Let's just sit down here.
Think about this for a minute.
Yeah, or else you'll have your own big stink. Yeah, you've all been there. I know it, because I've been there. And then you go around, if you're good, you go around and apologizing. Otherwise, you kind of go around sheepishly hoping that no one will bring it up. So our responses to what happens are not solid. We can respond differently to the same thing, that different people can respond differently at the same time. That it really is a very flexible, open situation, and that if we can give ourselves a lot of space, things open up and can look very, very, very differently. I've talked about subconscious gossip. And so the subconscious gossip is nothing but a whole bunch of thoughts. It's a monologue over and over and over again. I said yesterday it's like a soap opera, and it's reruns. Sometimes it's not a soap opera, but it's still probably reruns. It's the conversation we're very familiar with. We have certain areas that we like to spend a lot of time in, depending upon who we are. If the predominant emotion is anger, then we have all these reasons why we can be angry and why we should be angry and how this yada, 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 yada. And if it's attachment, then it's all about attachment and so forth. Now, then the question is, what are emotions? Well, the way I see it, and I think it's in line with the teachings of the Buddha, that emotions are just a bunch of thoughts. It's a collection of thoughts and stories. I am angry because of. I am in love because of. I am attached to this because of. Yada, 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 yada. And we can get very good at thinking about these things, talking about these things, expressing them. But then we have to go back to, well, this is not a pipe. This is not a pipe. These are just thoughts. Thoughts or emotions are a bit like thoughts with credentials. You've all got resumes, or at least know what a resume is. So you've got this emotion, you've got this thought. And so, you'll pull up things from your history that are related to this. This reminds me of, this is why I feel this way. If you're in a relationship, if you're married, you might go back 15 years. About, 15 years ago you told me yada, yada, yada. With kids that can happen too. But we pull up all this history, and we list all these things about justifying why we're feeling the way we do. And then we frequently go around to our friends and express how we feel, whether it be anger or jealousy or attachment and so forth. And we pick out friends that we know are going to agree with us most likely. Those are the ones we go to, because what we're looking for is a letter of recommendation here to justify our feeling that way. And then on top of that, we'll have a cover letter for this particular situation. You can look at your emotions as being that way. And so you've got the resume, and so you just put a different cover letter on it depending upon this different situation. But it's the same old, same old. And so freedom lies is letting go of all of that, not believing it. Go ahead. Yeah, it gets very physical. It gets into the body. You can even hold it in certain parts of your body, like you said, crying and so forth. And what happens is that this is where habitual patterns come in, because a lot of times things just arise seemingly instantly, before thought even, because it's such a strong habit. But let's just say in the case of anger, but if then after the anger arose and maybe you bought into it and you blew up and so forth, afterwards you're probably going to think about it and justify why you got angry. You're going to have all these reasons why you deserve to get angry and why that person needed to be told what you told them. And it's the same way with others. But A lot of things just, it seems like they just arise before thought because it's such a strong habit. Again, the mindfulness. Yeah, the mindfulness. It's good to understand what the 10 non-virtuous actions are, the 10 virtuous actions, which are the opposite. Mm-hmm. Realize the difference between virtue and non-virtue, and then when you do engage in non-virtue and you realize it eventually, then to purify it and then make that aspiration not to do it again. It's also good to actually put energy into purposely doing virtuous activity and developing a virtuous habit.
And kind of trump the other one.
Exactly, yeah, yep. I think I said last night that a sign of progress is when you've blown up and engaged in one of these kleshas, and there's less time between the blow up and the realizing that, oops, I blew it, and I shouldn't have done that this is a problem. So it happens slowly usually. Darn, it'd be nice if, okay, I know this, fine, everything's going to be okay, but our habits are very, very strong. Yes? Yeah, there's a movie by The Life of Garchen Rinpoche. I don't know if that's the one you're referring to. Oh, okay, yeah. This is called For the Benefit of Beings. And he spent 20 years in a Chinese prison. He actually was one of the monks that took up arms and started shooting the Chinese soldiers, killing them. And so when they finally caught him, he did go to prison. In a way, it's surprising that he was not executed. In the movie, he says, I was protecting the Dharma. Yeah, it wasn't done out of anger. It wasn't done to protect his own life. It was to protect the Dharma. So that's an important point. And then I bet he quickly recovered too. Mm-hmm. So, just kind of like a wave.
So can we think of thoughts that have some sort of strong attachment or aversion would be considered emotions then? In other words, the other thoughts we have, we don't have any, that just flow through us, we don't have any particularly compelling attachment or aversion to, so they just kind of...
Yeah, most thoughts we do seem to have some kind of an emotional response to them. Or most of our thoughts might be the other way around, that they are bolstering our emotions. And they are attachment, aversion, indifference, pride, and jealousy. A lot of our activity and thoughts can be just to keep, you might say, the mechanism going so that we don't have frightening thoughts, painful thoughts. This is what a lot of compulsive activity is that there are things, painful things. It might be self-hatred. It might be abusive childhood. A lot of the times the two are the same. They're interconnected, interdependent. But to keep those things from coming up, we just keep busy. For instance, with a lot of thoughts. I did this program at KTD in August, and there were 3 veterans of Vietnam there. And 2 of them had the same story. Is that got back from Vietnam, worked, things went, got married, had a family, yada, 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 and then I retired. All of a sudden, I started drinking uncontrollably, and all this stuff was coming up for them. And I'm here because I need help. It really is important to pay attention to what's going on, and again, be a child of illusion. And in terms of guiding the thoughts, try to have more loving and compassionate thoughts towards yourself and towards other people. Encourage those kinds of thoughts and be this, have a little more of a skeptical approach to most other thoughts. You know, thoughts are good for figuring out your income taxes, paying the bills, these sorts of things. But they keep you from experiencing things directly. So this is what I have next, is that and this is kind of related, that because of our habitual emotional patterns, that we have buttons that people push of ours, like that bag of garbage pushed his button. And what we have to realize is that that's our button, that we installed that button. And that we can also uninstall that button. We can learn the software to uninstall that button. It's not a big deal. You don't have to beat yourself up because you have buttons that get pushed. This empowers yourself when you realize you have the ability to uninstall these buttons, to neutralize these the emotional responses that you have. You don't gain power by trying to control external circumstances. It'll never happen. You've heard about getting your ducks in the row. You know what happens? You're going to have a quack up. Couldn't resist. And I think we've all had those. But if you realize that you don't have to get the ducks in a row, that you can go inside and work with your responses to having all kinds of chaos on the outside, that it becomes workable. And thank you for not groaning, Lama. Yes, we have traveled together and shared rooms. I'll tell you this, this is kind of personal, that I did have a very difficult childhood that had a lot of trauma in it. And this is one reason why I like this, doing this program. But when I was 20 years old, I had gone home for Christmas and had a nightmare. And in the nightmare, it was so frightening, I felt that I was going to be executed. I got up out of bed, literally out of bed, went over to my bedroom window and knocked the glass out with my bare hands and then dove through it head first. That's how comfortable I felt at home. I have some scars to prove it. But now Lama Losong says that when we share a room, that in the middle of the night, I start laughing in my sleep.
Frequently.
I think the last thing he said, because in August we shared a room, one of the things he said, I said was, "Oh my God," and then I started laughing. So here's the laughter. That if we can really laugh at these silly mistakes that we make, rather than beating ourselves up, it's really helpful. It really is. That beating yourself up doesn't do any good at all. I'm going to read that poem again, since that kind of fits right in here, and go into that a little bit more here. Because this is all about thought. I'm thinking thoughts of long ago. I'm thinking tomorrow what may be so. I forget I'm thinking, it's not thought, it's real. I forget that what I think determines how I feel. And so this is obviously what I've been talking about. Yesterday doesn't exist. You can't change anything of what's happened yesterday. Last year, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it doesn't exist anymore. We can have thoughts and feelings and emotions about what happened then, but it's just thoughts. It's just these thoughts that are not the real thing. It's very different thinking about something that happened way back when. Yet, because we attach to these thoughts rather than watch them and observe them, then we have very strong emotional responses. And frequently, they're not pleasant, the responses that we have. And it's interesting. You know, you can go on a very nice vacation and have a wonderful time. But no matter how much you look at the pictures of that vacation and that very nice time, it doesn't really seem to have that much of a uplifting feeling. But when you start feeling, it's thinking about all the bad times you have, that really drags you down. Because you place more importance on the bad things. Yeah, that's true. Both are illusions. They're just mental constructs. And the thing is, maybe this is a good thing to point out here while I'm on this. Our Buddha nature is beyond concept. It is totally beyond concept. And it might be difficult to understand this, but if you go beyond the concept, it doesn't mean that you're flatlined, like when you're hooked up to a medical device. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden, blah, there's nothing, that life is boring. But you're experiencing directly before thought, before you do your commentary on what you're experiencing, before you're projecting onto what you're experiencing. And so the next is I'm missing life before my eyes. I'm missing beauty in favor of lies. You're missing the present, and you're either living in the past or planning for the future. Either way, it's all in your mind. It's not what's happening. And what I see is me. I thought it was you. What this friend of mine saw was him. He thought it was the bag. And of course, when we've got a sentient being that we're bouncing off, it gets a little more complicated, because they're in the same place, thinking that what they're seeing is you rather than what they're seeing is themselves. So we have to realize that. And again, this helps us develop compassion when you start realizing that the people that you are interacting with are just as confused as you, maybe more, probably more. You've come in contact with the Dharma. They haven't. And then, so the observed exists only in the eye of the observer's view. This brings up emptiness. I could do this. Lama, would you explain emptiness?
But I know we circumvent that one.
Yeah. I'm not going to do that to you. That would be cruel and unusual punishment. But you start explaining it traditionally by explaining interdependence. So big and little are relative. I'm fairly little. But one time I found myself in a room full of Japanese, and I could see right across the room. I was one of the tallest people in the whole room. And it's that way. There is night because there's dark, there's black because there's white, but it's all comparative. And so it's the observer that's doing the comparison. That's what's happening. I like to use a dictionary to explain interdependence in this comparison. It's relative reality is what I'm talking about here. And one way to understand relative reality is in terms of relatives, aunts and uncles and cousins and so forth. In relative reality, everything is related to everything else, just like aunts and uncles and cousins and so forth. And so you want to know what a word means. Let's say relative. You go to the dictionary and look it up, and it gives you a very precise definition using other words. And, well, what do those words mean? We've got to go to the dictionary to look up the meanings of those other words. And those other words, those meanings are in more words. There is not a single word in existence that is not in the dictionary. There's nothing that is independent of the dictionary. Words are interdependent. Not only that, but, there have been dictionaries for centuries, and the definitions keep changing. Go to Samuel Johnson's dictionary, for instance. The meaning of the words keep changing. It's not solid. When I was a younger person, a menu was something you'd get at a restaurant rather than when you made a phone call. Or, of course, we didn't have handheld or even larger digital devices with menus. That came much later. So there are all kinds of meanings to words that are new meanings, and they come up with new meanings. I can't keep up with it. It's continually in a state of flux. There's no solidity there. And so whatever it is that we are observing is in relative reality, and it's comparison, and we're making the comparison. And we think, confused samsaric beings make the mistake of thinking it's solid, real, this is the way it is, it couldn't be any other way. And so we need to understand that what we're seeing is, in a way, our point of view. As soon as we start putting labels on things. So the pot calls the kettle black because only blackness sees black. I think that's pretty obvious. When you're in a bad mood, things look bad. If you're in a good mood, things look better. And so I remember I'm only thinking, I laugh and life is beautiful. Maybe that's what I'm laughing about at night. Quite honestly, I don't remember my dreams, so I don't know what I'm laughing about. I have to depend on the Lama here. But anyway, lighten up. Lighten up. It's just your thoughts. You don't have to take them so seriously. They're not solid. this pain feels a little solid here in my leg. But as was mentioned about His Holiness the Dalai Lama, certainly you will have times when strong feelings can arise, but let go of them rather than attach to them. There's nothing wrong with crying. It's fine if you're meditating and suddenly you're overcome with sadness. If you feel like crying, don't fight it, cry. Let it happen, and then let go of it. It doesn't mean anything more than, well, I felt like crying. I guess the last thing that I want to talk about this afternoon is depression. And as I said, when I came to Buddhism, I was suffering from depression. I think I mentioned that in here. And that's real manure. That's a real pile of manure, depression. And I learned a lot from it. I learned an awful lot from it, and I'd like to kind of pass on a few things that I learned to people, because it seems that depression is very common in this country, that the country is full of people that are taking antidepressants. And so what I came to realize was, and it was because I attended a teaching, and the teacher said this, that depression has two aspects: anger towards yourself and laziness. Nothing more complicated than that. So we have a lot of anger towards ourselves about our shortcomings, about the mistakes we made, about how we're always screwing up. We might have anger towards other people too, anger towards the world, looking at how bad the world is and all the problems in the world. And of course you cherry pick. You cherry pick all the problems in the world. The more serious it is, the more you like it. Been there, done that, I hear. Yeah, and the same thing with yourself. The more serious the infraction, the better you like it, and the more time you want to spend there on yourself. You love it, because that's what you're looking for. You're cherry picking all these things that are wrong with the world. And so you have a lot of anger and resentment that you're not perfect, that you're screwing up, And you just can't get rid of those thoughts. They keep going over in your head over and over and over again. And so then comes the laziness, because this gets really stressful and tiring, just spending all your time thinking about all of this. So you decide to check out and let's go to sleep. And that goes into the laziness. So you sleep and sleep and sleep and sleep.
You get tired of beating yourself up, you have to take a nap.
Exactly.
It's terrible.
She got it.
Oh my goodness.
Well, this was my personal experience. I was able to sleep 14 to 16 hours a day at my peak when I was in peak form. I'd get up late, have breakfast, and just having breakfast was tiring. And I'd have to go back to sleep. But that didn't work all the time, and then the psychiatrist gave me medication that people thought I was on speed. It didn't dull me, it just gave me all kinds of energy, and then I could, 4 hours would be about all the sleep I could get. So then I went into frenetic activity, compulsive activity. I'm sure no one here is familiar with that, but that's another form of laziness, is you get so busy. And of course, my mind was racing too, doing all these things that it kind of doesn't give you time to think about beating yourself up as much. It's still there. It's still right under the surface, and so you have to keep busy, keep doing things. Shop till you drop. House cleaning. I never got into either of those. But some people do. Alcohol, drugs, some kind of frenetic activity that kind of keeps the lid on things. So you're not spending all your time beating yourself up and thinking about how bad it is. And then there's a third type of laziness. These are classic 3 types of laziness. The third is self-deprecation, which is, oh, I could never do that. Poor me, poor me. This is what they say in AA. Poor me, poor me, pour me another one.
Yeah.
Or light up another one, or whatever. But those are the 3 types of laziness that we can get involved in with depression. And I can see some people are familiar with these, and that's good because now you're seeing this a little clearer. But they all have remedies. That's the good news. Again, if the Buddha had said, well, this is the situation you're in, but there's no remedies, ooh, that would be bad. But there are remedies for all of this. For the anger towards yourself, it's loving kindness and compassion. And just realize that you don't want to suffer. And in your confusion, you think the way not to suffer is to beat yourself up. That you're going to somehow or other beat yourself into being a better person. Which is really bizarre thinking, but but that's the thinking. That's the thought process, is I'm going to beat myself up until I become a better person. If it's not working, do more of it. Yeah, I don't think it was depression, but yeah, it's the same kind of thinking. Yep. But it's very, very common thinking in samsara. If it's not working, then do more of it. I just haven't done enough of it, but if I keep hitting my head against the wall, it's going to work eventually. So it's loving kindness is the antidote for anger. So learn to be more kind with yourself, gentler with yourself. Give yourself more space. I keep repeating this over and over again. But that's the way I teach this, is I keep coming back to these points from different places. Kind of learn to be a kind, gentle, supportive parent, grandmother. I had very fond feelings of my grandmother. Like that to yourself. That realize that the way you improve is by making mistakes, trying new things and making mistakes, and then picking yourself up and continue going, working skillfully with the mistakes that you make. Whenever I do anything new, maybe not whenever, usually when I try something new, it seems difficult. I'm trying to think of what I did recently that was new, but it was difficult, whatever it was. But after doing it for a few times, I improved. There's a learning curve that we all need to have. And for the laziness, it's diligence. And so for the couch potato, it's just do it. Instead of, when you wake up in the morning, staying in bed and thinking about all the things you have to do during the day and how you're never going to have time to do it all and it's too overwhelming, get up and do something. Anything. Here's a story a friend of mine told me. He developed, I can't tell you exactly what the condition was, but suddenly he had this desire to take all his clothes off walking home. And he ended up in the mental hospital. You know, this will do it to you. I recommend keeping your clothes on. He ended up in the mental hospital, and to the point where he was getting electric shock treatments. This was serious. And he told me, this was his story, that he just kind of realized that I could be here the rest of my life. You know, he had just let go of everything. You know, looked like the classic person that was in a mental institution, unkempt, didn't bathe, didn't do anything. And he said, well, I decided to start brushing my teeth. And so he started brushing his teeth. And then pretty soon he started combing his hair. And then pretty soon he started bathing and so forth. And just by paying attention to these little details in his life, doing something rather than just laying there and giving up, he got out. And he has not been back. This happened in the 70s. In mid-70s is when he was hospitalized. So, you know, do something. Take out the garbage. Make the bed. You know, do little things to just start doing something. You don't have to clean the whole house from top to bottom in one day and wash all the windows, but do a little something. The mindless busyness, the remedy for that kind of diligence is to prioritize, to look at what needs to be done, what is important, and what isn't so important. And do the important things first. One thing that I have noticed about Khenpo Kartar Rinpoche, when he has come to my center, commonly there will be some rupas that need to be filled. And you have to give him a list in advance so he can bring the proper mantras and so forth. But it's like, when he gets there, where are the rupas? Let's do this right now. This is important. I'll be teaching later. I've got some free time. Let's do it. So prioritize. Do what needs to be done first, and then do the things that aren't so important. With a laziness, you never get to the important things. You just keep busy doing all the little things. And for the self-deprecation, it's realize your Buddha nature. That you are a Buddha in the making. That you have perfection and purity. It just has not been cleaned off and completely bloomed. But no matter what you have done, that cannot be altered or changed or lost. It's just that you're not seeing it. That's all. So that is the remedy. That's what depression is, and that's what the remedy is. for me, what really helped, and I've already talked about this, was realizing that what the depression was dependent on was the thoughts. That you can't have the depression without the thoughts. And the thoughts can change. This goes back to what I talked about a little earlier. The thoughts can change. You can even, one of the things that I started doing is when I started having depressive thoughts, this is my own technique, is say, well, wait a minute. And so I was really good at beating myself up about forgetting things. I'm sure no one here forgets things. I would go, oh, I forgot again. Yada, yada, yada. Then this long storyline about how forgetful I was and always screwing up and yada, yada. And so I started saying, oh, I just remembered. Because if I forgot, I'd never remember. How are you going to look at it? Might have taken me 3 hours to remember, but I remembered. So these things are not solid, but we think that they're solid. We try to convince ourselves that it's solid. And that's why we have to have such a long storyline. Is because it's not solid, so you have to keep bolstering up all the places where it looks like it's not solid. Well, I'd like to open it up to questions. You've got 10 minutes, right? Isn't it 3:15?
Yeah, you're fine.
Yeah, I've done a lot of talking. Any comments or questions?
Can you talk more about the space thing? I know you talked about it before,
Yeah.
and it seems to have left, and even when I was flipping through my notes, it seems to not be there either.
It's just space there.
It's spaced out.
Well, the idea of space is that when we having a lot of thoughts or strong emotions, that just takes up everything. It's full. It's like having a room completely full of furniture, where you've got the furniture stacked one on top of another, and it's just full. And if you can let go of the thoughts and the emotions, you'll find that they were residing in space. Another way to put this is this way. Plants, and I talked about this, that plants to grow, they need space to spread out. And so if you would plant a plant in a bunch of weeds that are already tall, it'll never grow. It doesn't have room to spread out. Another way to look at this is when you're meditating and you have a thought and you get distracted by that thought, it's attached to it, you'll find that that thought brings up another thought. And then that thought brings up another thought. And pretty soon you've got a train of thoughts. So each thought is a car on that train. Now, if you were in your car, parked at a railroad crossing and the train was going by, if that train was going really fast, you would hardly see the space between the cars. But if that train slows down, you start seeing there is space between the cars. And you might even start realizing there's space above the cars, there's space in front of the cars, there's space behind the cars. That these cars are existing in space. And so as you meditate and start realizing this about the thoughts, and this takes a lot of practice. This is not, don't expect, oh, well, now I get it. Yeah, I'll meditate in space. But the thoughts are happening in space. Sogyal Rinpoche has a bizarre story in the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. This is my last example of space. But remember, this is a bizarre story, and most people don't like to hear it because of the ending. So I'm warning you. It's about the frog that, this is a good Florida story. I've noticed a lot of frogs here. The frog that lives in the bottom of a well, and the frog that lives in the ocean. As far as I know, frogs don't live in the ocean, but this is a Tibetan story. What do they know about oceans? So the frog that lives in the ocean comes to visit his cousin that lives in the bottom of the well. And his cousin invites him down. Look at this wonderful home that I live in. It's so spacious. I've got so much room here to move around in. And the frog that lives in the ocean goes, huh? This is spacious? My home is much bigger than this. And the frog in the well says, is it twice this big? Oh, it's much, much bigger than this. Is it 4 times this big? Oh, it's much, much bigger than this. You've got to come with me and I'll show you. So they hop out to the ocean. And they're there on the edge looking out at the ocean, and the frog that lives in the ocean says, this is my home. And the frog that lives in the well looks at it, and his head explodes. You got to think like a frog. You didn't see that coming, did you?
Is that a warning not to explore our spaciousness?
Your head won't explode. Maybe your ego. Trungpa Rinpoche used the analogy of a cocoon. And the idea was that we surround ourselves with a cocoon for protection. The edge of that cocoon is our fear. This is the stuff that we don't know, that we don't control. So it's pretty claustrophobic because our fear doesn't take very far out of our known territory, and that's it. And so that's this idea of being down in a well. We actually are very claustrophobic. It's very crowded in there. We have all these thoughts, and there's no space because space is scary. It's unknown. You never know what's going to happen. You're vulnerable. And that's scary. You don't have control over it. But on the other hand, the space is full of potential. And since there's no ego there, there's no, when you become realized, you're free of suffering. You're free of all of samsara. There's nothing to protect. The Karmapa said, the 16th said it on his deathbed, nothing happens. In space, nothing happens. Yeah, any other, did that help? Okay. Sometimes I'm not sure, if I helped or made things more confusing. But one last comment or question? Yeah, that's a good observation. Yeah, and when you go into somebody else's house, you can tell a lot about them too, just by looking at the house. Yeah, you can tell a lot about people by the way the house is set up and so forth. And I'm not saying judging people, it just gives you an insight into, where they are.